So I think we'll kick off. Just to introduce myself once again, my name's Louise Mendelsohn. I'm SVP of Commercial here at Vuelio. I'll shortly be introducing Hollie Parry, who will be leading today's presentation. The title is How to Build a Reliable Reputation in the Press. And leading today's presentation, we have Hollie, who is Insights and Content Lead here at Vuelio. Over the past 3 years, Hollie has had both data analysis and marketing roles within our Insights team, helping to raise awareness of the expertise that we offer in the PR industry. Prior to that, and over the past 7 years, a large part of Hollie's marketing career has also been dedicated to STEM industries, working with several charities across the UK and Canada to make maths and science accessible in marginalised communities. She has since brought the value of accessibility to the insights field with hopes to make data analysis less intimidating and enjoyable for everyone. So really looking forward to hearing what Amy's got to say, and hopefully you guys will enjoy, and please do use the chat function as previously mentioned. Over to you.
Thanks, Lou. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. As mentioned, we're going to be exploring the concept of reliability and what it means to be reliable in the press. We'll be looking at a few things here in the next 20 minutes, and we'll be primarily covering, to start with, what it means to be reliable from a media perspective. We'll also be looking at a few case studies and which brands are and aren't seen as reliable and how this impacts media coverage. And importantly, we'll be looking at afterwards as well how you can actually measure reliability, your own brand reliability in the media. And then wrapping up towards the end, we'll have a look at what we've learned, and we'll look at six top tips for you to apply to your best practice going forward to continue to invest in your reliability in the press. So, okay, let's get started. The first thing that we should dive into before looking at case studies is what exactly we mean by reliable. And in this context, we mean a few different things. So firstly, what we mean is that your voice is trusted by journalists, particularly in this period of high misinformation and disinformation. There are lots and lots of topics that would be aligned with your business objectives, where misinformation risk is high. For example, if we talk about climate change or cryptocurrency, there's so much conflicting information on the internet that being an established brand is really valuable for journalists to know that they can come to you without risking their own reputation by sharing information that may not be true. So one aspect of being a reliable brand can mean that you are a trusted voice for journalists to turn to make statements, to add context, to make predictions, things like that. And secondly, what we mean by reliable is that when you're making claims about things that you have contributed to certain fields, that what you're saying is true. And when you are known for following up or justifying the statements that you make, or that you have justification behind it, you're more likely to get media awareness, and we found this in our studies. If you are known for making false promises, your chance of getting awareness is just much lower in general. So over the past year, Vuelio has conducted a couple of studies that we're going to be looking at today that explore sustainability as a concept. So that's what we'll be focusing on today, and how the certain brands' reliability, or pre-established reliability, has greatly impacted their media awareness over time. Alongside this, what we've also found is that not only do you get a greater opportunity for media awareness and a trusted brand reputation, your risk of misinformation and disinformation is actually much lower because you've already got that established reputation in the press. So let's have a look at some of the research in action. So our first study is kind of focused around the COP27 period and thereafter. So we looked at pharmaceuticals and who has been considered reliably green over the past 6 months, and who has maybe not been in that reputation so much, and why. The brands that we chose here were the ones that were most mentioned in the press from the start of November last year to 6 months afterwards. And what we found was really profound. So the first thing that we found was that the volume of coverage was actually much higher for brands who released a stronger diversity of green initiatives over time. So we can see here in the UK that AstraZeneca had a really strong positive share of voice when it came to green initiatives. So of course you could argue that AstraZeneca are a well-known pharmaceutical brand in the UK, but aside from that, because this study focused entirely on green initiative coverage, AstraZeneca were most mentioned positively in that light anyway. And we know that media, general brand awareness has less of an impact than the actual initiatives, because when we move over to the US and Canada, we can see that Bayer, who are the most well-known pharmaceutical brand across North America in comparison to the other brands listed here, they still only had a 12% positive share of voice, which just goes to show that even though media awareness is really strong for them in general, their positive share of voice was lesser so due to the fact that they had a lower diversity of green initiatives released before, during and after COP27. Whereas Samsung Biologics, who generally have a lower volume of press coverage in comparison to Bayer, did sort of marginally around the same share of voice, which kind of just shows the impacts that having this, investing in this reliable green reputation over time really makes. And we can also see here that so Bayer and Pfizer chose to release a lot of their coverage around the period of COP27, and this actually didn't pay off as well as brands who chose to talk about green initiatives that they were investing in throughout the year, before, during and after. And this was particularly impactful because there were a few crises for both brands around this time, which meant that the positive contributions that they were making, which should have had really strong awareness around the time of COP27, was drowned out by the crises. But had they invested proactively and afterwards, they may have had a better positive share of voice overall. So next we explored how the awards and accreditations were referenced within positive sustainability coverage. This didn't include coverage where the main focus of the accreditation where the main focus of the coverage was the accreditation or the award. For example, we excluded coverage around that were directly praising the efforts, because that wouldn't be considered reliable coverage. What we're really looking for here is coverage that mentions awards and efforts that brands have made in the wider climate discussion. So, for example, if the BBC is talking about which pharmaceutical brands are the greenest at that time, who are they mentioning and what are they saying about them, rather than coverage around, for example, AstraZeneca have done XYZ for the climate. That doesn't necessarily count, because that's more of a product of the PR team's efforts rather than a general boosting of reliability in the press. So the main discovery that we found here is that the higher diversity of coverage in the press, the stronger the prominence rate. So the more trusted the brands are to be mentioned in headlines, as well as the main body of the article, if they've released more green initiatives over time with justifications behind them. And what I mean by justifications and accreditations is things like awards, external bodies backing up the claims, fundraising, certifications, initiatives, all these sorts of things. Anything that's not just a statement is what's considered an accreditation here. So we really found that the more that was released over time is really the key thing here, and really paid off with having a much higher prominence rate. And the same with recognition here. So GSK and AstraZeneca had released, according to the accreditation chart, the most green investments, green initiatives throughout the year. And as a result, they were regularly mentioned within wider climate discussion coverage as as a reliable brand for the statements that they were making. For example, if we were to look at, again, Samsung Biologics, so it may say something like, Samsung Biologics, who recently decided to reduce their plastic packaging in such country, that kind of mention is often found in a climate discussion right now. So it seems as though journalists want to justify why they've chosen certain brands rather than just dropping names. They want to back it up with something recent and reliable that's happened. And in turn, that's really helping to boost the reputations of specific brands. We also found that when it came to prominence, that there was lower prominence for brands who had released less coverage over time as well. So unfortunately, to look at Bayer and Pfizer again, they focused on releasing more public statements and responding to more queries for opinions and predictions, and there were less initiatives and sort of accreditations over time. And whilst this did sort of support their prominence and the coverage that they were getting and helped to keep them sort of on par with the other brands, if they had also released a similar volume of accreditations over time, they would have really boosted their reliability and trust within the media, and in turn helped to maybe get their name in more headlines or be the focus of more articles. So the next case study that we looked at here, just so we could compare results, is actually energy suppliers and their reputation in the press. And what we found was that overall, much like pharma, sustainability comms, with sustainability comms, the more initiatives that were released over time, the more of a trusted brand they were represented to be in the media. And as a result, this really paid off with positive coverage, and general prominence, and the likelihood of them developing their share of voice over time. And we can really see here, so what I found particularly interesting here is that Octopus released almost double the number of press releases compared to British Gas of things that they were doing to contribute to a better environment. But they had sort of roughly the same positive share of voice. So Octopus had 26% and British Gas had 19%. So you could arguably say that, well, British Gas released half the amount, but they had the same positive coverage. However, when we look at the negative coverage, what we can see here is that British Gas still had quite a high share at 18%, but Octopus had almost none, which means that it really does help to reduce the volume of negative coverage as well as potentially boost positive coverage. And again, looking at recognition of efforts, exactly the same as pharma, Octopus and SSE's regular green comms has really paid off in PR value. Recognition and headline mentions are really high for both, showing that they get the credit for the investments that they've made, even though the coverage for coverage that isn't directly referencing it, and the main focus isn't the award itself. This really is talking about coverage in the wider climate discussion that is not referencing, that is not direct praise of the award itself, where your reputation is really being boosted in passing coverage, essentially. For example, we saw a lot of Octopus, who released 7 new wind farms in Europe recently. We saw a lot of that in coverage and national press outlets as well. Again, much like pharma, there seems to be a growing trend of justifying why certain brands have been chosen in topics where misinformation is potentially high. There's a growing trend justifying why certain brands have been chosen through justified accreditations. So things like they have recently joined the Science Based Targets Initiative. That's a really, really big one. The SBTI has been mentioned so much recently in both general press, but also science and industry publications as well. Any kind of initiative really is helping to boost your reputation and also get further coverage opportunities and media opportunities in the future. So EDF and Good Energy here are actually a really interesting mid-ground. So we can see here that they released roughly the same number of accreditations over time. And as a result, their prominence and recognition rate is relatively the same, which just goes to show the correlation between how this is reflected and demonstrated as a reliable, how it contributes to your reputation as a reliable brand, and how that affects the media opportunities that you can get, and the prominence opportunities as well, how likely you are to be trusted to be mentioned in a headline or something like that. And just to focus on Utilita for a moment, what's quite interesting here is that Utilita don't necessarily have any negative press in regards to their climate efforts at the moment or throughout this study period, but they haven't released as many as the other energy suppliers have, and it really shows. So whilst there hasn't, again, necessarily been anything negative to say about them, they are quite clearly missing quite a lot of media opportunities that they could really take advantage of. Their press releases are less available by far than other brands, and as a result, their passive coverage is really, really high when it comes to prominence, which when we look at the other brands here, we can see that just by contributing more statements to the media, saying more about what you're doing and justifying how you're doing that and how you're going to follow through with those commitments, it really does make an impact on the headline and substantial mentions that you get. Whereas Utilita's passive mentions are sky high because the media don't really know what to say about them when it comes to this specific topic. And we can see that because when there's rankings on which.com and alike, talking about the greenest energy companies, Utilita just doesn't get mentioned as much as the other brands do. And that's not because there's been a crisis per se to pick on, but because there's been just not as much positive accreditations to rely on over time. So it seems as though there's a lack of reliability there to mention their name within the article coverage. So it's a really good opportunity for Utilita right now to take advantage of this and potentially reap the benefits of having a neutral state and invest in more accreditations over time and see how this affects their prominence. Which similarly, going back to the pharma case study earlier, Pfizer have recently partnered with Samsung Biologics for a new manufacturing deal. And considering Pfizer were further down on the recognition scale than Samsung Biologics, this would be a really good opportunity to lean into the climate discussion within this deal, particularly around the topic of manufacturing, and potentially reap the benefits of an already established green reputation in the press for the Samsung Biologics have as a trusted name. The partnerships can be really beneficial there. So having looked at all of those case studies and seen the clear correlation between boosting your reliability and investing over time and really leaning into the diversity of messaging, we really need to know how we can measure reliability and how we know that our investments have paid off. So aside from the metrics that I've just demonstrated, which are totally yours to experiment with as well, there's a few other approaches that we can take to see how we're doing right now, how our investments are going, and measure up afterwards to see which investments are paying off. So a general structure that we'd offer here is to start by being specific. Yes, sustainability is really important for lots of different brands, which is why we chose it. But there are other things that maybe align closer with your comms strategy or your business objectives. For example, you could be a tech startup who wants to lead the voice in AI. You could be a education company that wants to be the leading voice on a new policy. You could be an energy company who has recently faced a crisis of not following up with a commitment, a climate commitment, and you want to try and see where you're at right now and improve your trust in the media over time so you can build that media awareness back up. So once you've chosen the topic that's important to you, the next important thing to remember is that when it comes to measuring reliability, it's all about quality over quantity. I think that it's quite common for for brands to want to know the volume that they're measuring, the volume of their coverage, and want to measure that more importantly over anything else. But when it comes to reliability, it's all about quality. And there's a few different metrics that we can explore here that goes beyond volume, that really allows you to explore the quality of your coverage and the reliability within it, because volume matters less when we're talking about reliability. It's really exploring the quality. So to look at a few metrics here, key messages will be a really good one. So once you've got your sample of coverage on the specific topic that you'd like to explore, just stacking up a couple of different key messages that you can see trends amongst within the coverage, and seeing how your reliability is represented. What keywords are being mentioned in reference to you? Are you being called trusted? There are lots of charities who are, like for example PDSA, often referred to as the trusted brand for animal welfare. Are you being called trusted? Are you being called other terms that may lean more on the side of doubt? Gathering these trends of which messages are being used to represent your brand in coverage that you haven't necessarily contributed towards through a press release is a really good example of measuring your reliability. Sentiment is an obvious one. How positively are you being spoken about when it comes to topics that you want to be a leading voice on, where your trust really matters to you? What is your positive coverage saying, and what is your negative coverage saying? Neutral as well is equally important. And how is that then tying back to reliability? Is any of the negative coverage doubting your trust? Is it suggestive of the idea that you might be sharing misinformation or something like that? Target publications are really important to look at as well, particularly when it comes to competitors as well. All of these metrics can definitely be applied to the competitor landscape as well, to see how you stack up compared to other people. But having a look at where you're being seen as a trusted brand is really important. For example, if you're represented as a highly trusted brand in a industry publication that has no relevance to you, or a small-scale blog, but you are being seen as a untrusted brand or an unreliable brand in national publications, that really matters. And it's about coming back to your KPIs there and seeing who your target media list is and how they represent you. And that's a really good way to refine your sample as well, if you wanted to increase your efficiency when it comes to measuring your reliability, is to pick your target publications and see how they're talking about you as a head start. Article feature is another one. So what is being said about you when it comes to your reliability? How are you being justified? Are you having passive mentions of things that you've done recently? Are you being cited through a study? Are you being quoted? Which spokesperson is being quoted? Also, how are your competitors being represented? If there's multiple, for example, pharma brands being spoken about in the same article, who gets the study and who gets a brief sentence? And how does that play out over time? How is that reflective of your reliability as a brand? Recognition of accreditations, as I was demonstrating in the previous case studies. So having a look at how often in the wider discussion your brand is mentioned and an initiative of yours is mentioned, or an award or a certification, as I was saying. And the last one, of course, we can't go out without mentioning, is the Vuelio Impact Score. This is a bespoke metric that we offer on the Insights team, where we are able to combine both quality and quantity, and the objectives that are important to you. So, for example, if reliability was your objective, we'd be able to combine all of these metrics into one impact score, and give you this a sort of a result over time, so you can see in just one metric how well you're doing, which is really helpful for reporting to the C-suite and things when overloading with too many metrics can get a bit time consuming and overwhelming. And something we can also do with that is apply it to competitors as well. So we can take your impact score and we can measure the impact score of other brands and give you an impact share. And applying this to reliability, we could take your reliability score, your competitor's reliability score, and give you a share of reliability. So that's something to consider as well. So wrapping up, 7 top tips that you can take forward to apply to your practice to consider investing in and measuring your reliability going forward. Is to assess and refine which topics are most important to you. We obviously can't be a reliable voice in every topic, and that's okay. It's important to assess where the best place is to invest your efforts. For many companies right now, it is sustainability or another ESG-centric area. But some questions to ask yourself here would be something like, are there any major discussions or political decisions I want to be involved in? Is there an industry or reputation crisis ahead that I want to limit the impact of? Or is there a growing community of misinformation online around my brand or my products that I want to try and limit the impact of in the press? So if you don't want this misinformation to get out into the news, what can you do to limit that impact? So the second one is to consider, on top of that, how much you can invest over time. This particularly applies to small businesses who are working with smaller budgets or non-profit organizations. When it comes to reliability, what we really have seen here through the case studies is that investing over time is really, really key. Don't wait until something is on the horizon or happening, or a crisis or something like that, and for you to start releasing or signing up for awards or joining initiatives, because we've seen time and time again through other studies as well that that's almost just too late. If you don't already have that established reputation, multiple resources over time for journalists to turn to, then it's not as valuable for you, and it doesn't support your reliability as a brand as much as if you were to disperse your investments over a longer period of time. So considering how you can do that in a way that works for your budget is really important. Consider a consistent set of general and reliability metrics is what I was trying to say. So what I mean by that is, when you are putting together your KPI dashboard, obviously you want to have a reliable and consistent set of general metrics that you turn to all the time to keep measuring, to see how your general performance is going. But consider having a separate reliability set of metrics too when you start exploring your trust in the press. What metrics from what I was mentioning on the last slide are important to your brand? You don't need to pick them all by any means. And keep going with that month on month or year on year to see how your investments are paying off over time. Be sure to measure where you're at right now, where you're at sort of halfway through your period of investment, and at the end of the year or the end of the period of trial. Number 4 is to diversify your efforts. And by that, I mean, there's a few brands that I can think of who put a lot of effort into just fundraising for the topic of choice, or just getting awards, or just joining initiatives. And it gets boring for the media, to be blunt about it, and this reduces your awareness over time. Justification is really about diversity. And if you are continually grabbing interest by saying, we're doing this now, and we're doing this now, and oh, now this company wants to partner with us and things like that, that continues to drive media awareness, but also continues to drive your trust in the press. And in that same vein, number 5 is utilizing partnerships. So we've seen time and time again, and we'll put all of these studies in the follow-up email, that partnerships just always benefit brands that aren't doing as well, which is why it's important to consider your competitor landscape. Pfizer, as I was saying earlier, manufacturing partnership with Samsung Biologics is a really great opportunity for them to increase their recognition rates for the initiatives that they're releasing, and things like that. Number 6 is to consider hiring around your areas of struggle. So this is a trend that we've noticed recently, and obviously it applies to companies that have the budget to do so. But what I mean by this is that we've seen a growing trend of companies that are specifically hiring content writers and marketers and PRs for the areas of media discussion that deeply align with their brand. So for example, we've recently seen that Chanel is hiring a sustainability content lead who has been hired to directly talk about green initiatives that the company is releasing over time, and there's diversity writers and there's all that sort of thing. So that's another thing to consider as well if your budget allows and if your reputation is really quite low. That's definitely something to lean into. And number 7 is to research your target audiences, knowing that where you may not be seen as reliable, the audiences of that community or publication could very well likely be different from your general audience. This particularly applies to companies who may be experiencing high rates of misinformation. It may be the case that, for example, if you're a hair care brand that has a strong community of loyal customers anyway, there might be a social media community online of people who are completely out of your demographic, or maybe don't need to use the products as much, that have found something out about an ingredient or something like that, and there's lots of misinformation around there. Finding out where that audience is listening, the media that they're paying attention to, and what their demographic is definitely worth considering when it comes to reliability, because you want to target them and get your message across to them as much as your general audience. And we have some tools that allow you to take advantage of that as well. Like the Pulsar platform, we have an audience analysis platform as well for you to take advantage of if that was to be of interest to you. That's everything from me. I have sorry, my dog's going to start barking. I have some time for Q&A if any of you have any questions. I'm just going to pop myself on mute. Lou, if you wouldn't mind taking over for a moment.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks very much, Hollie. So, yeah, there have been a few questions that have come in. Hopefully, Hollie can still hear us. There's been a couple, and please do just continue to submit. We can go through, I'd say, probably 4 or 5 questions in the time that we've got. So, assuming, Hollie, you can still hear us, the first question that's come in from Jane Selby is, how do the metrics that you have supplied in the case study tie back to reliability rather than general positive brand reputation?
Sorry about that, everyone. Of course, that's the time that someone knocks on my door. Sorry, could you repeat that, Lou?
Yeah, so it was just from Jane Selby. How do the metrics that you have supplied in the case study tie back to reliability rather than general positive brand reputation?
Yeah, so I think the important thing to lean into here is really that the coverage that we measured was really representative of the wider discussion around the topic of sustainability. So again, we weren't talking about coverage that directly praises brands for the efforts they've put in. It was more about what is the media saying about, for example, pharmaceuticals in the climate crisis, and which brands are being mentioned and which awards or accreditations are being referenced. So this is really passive contributions to the brand's reliability over time.
Perfect. And then Alison Gallagher actually asks, where does this data come from and over what period, just to clarify that?
Yeah, so we can definitely attach the studies and the presentation in an email after this. But the data all comes from the Vuelio software, and the 2 case studies that we looked at. The pharmaceutical study went from November of last year, around the COP27 period, to May of this year. And the second study, which was the energy supplier study, went from January of this year to June of this year.
Perfect. And then from Sarah Archer, you say it's important to measure over time, but what if a crisis hits?
Yeah, so I mean, great question, but as we saw in some of the two case studies, what we found is that it really is, of course, it's important to be increasing your messaging when crisis hits. But as we've talked about in other webinars as well, proactivity always pays off. Of course, it's important to be boosting your messaging when a crisis occurs and to be increasing how often you measure as well. Those measuring tips, definitely start increasing as much as you can, maybe weekly or daily, depending on the crisis, how your efforts are paying off. But it's not just about throwing it all in when a crisis occurs. Investing over time really does pay off, because journalists want to justify why they're turning to you in the press. They want to be able to back up why they've mentioned you. They want to be able to justify your name with a certain accreditation, and they can't do that without a reliable history of efforts that you've made when there wasn't something necessarily going on that was affecting your brand or industry.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Another question that's just come in from Paul. Is there a reason that we should only pick one topic to measure reliability on?
It's not so much about picking one topic as a general rule, but that's just a good place to start. There's probably an overarching theme for your brand or business that may be being highly discussed in the media right now, or is generally important. As I was saying, maybe a new policy has come out, or it's an ongoing situation like an industrial action crisis or any other type, a climate crisis, where that is still necessary.
Sure. And I'd say actually just from speaking to many clients myself, where we're talking about platform-based analytics and as well as the insight reports that we can provide, there is quite a big demand across our client base and prospective client base to start looking at share of voice in the context of these sorts of topics. So really trying to understand for the initiatives we've got, whether it is around ESG or certain other things, how are we doing against our peer group within a certain set of publications, perhaps, but specifically in the context of that issue. So I guess it's a case of trying to focus on something that you can measure and know you can do in a reliable way.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've got time maybe for one or two more. So yeah, when thinking about partnerships, what's your advice around how to choose who to collaborate with?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, there's so many ways to approach it. So again, not to keep picking at it, but to use our case studies, looking at Pfizer and Samsung Biologics, it's really, we see this often, it's really wise to do some competitor analysis at that point, and see who's doing well and see who you may potentially have a good relationship with, and trying to establish some sort of ground there where you have the opportunity to grow your reliability in a specific field, especially if it's important to them as well. On the topic of sustainability, it's obviously important for both Pfizer and Samsung Biologics, or the pharma industry as a whole. So for them to understand that Samsung is doing well and partner with them, it's a great opportunity. So it's about seeing who's doing well, learning about your competitor landscape, and seeing where you can grow new relationships and get that interest across as well.
Another question that's actually just come through is how important is familiarity of face? So should it always be the CEO, or should they consider offering others up for press interview as well?
We have seen that, so we're going to be kind of some inside scoop here, but we're actually releasing an industrial action white paper very soon that has looked at strikes in the UK over the past year, and our research there definitely suggests that a wider diversity of speakers really does pay off and continues, again, same with diversity in general, continues to drive media interest and continues to have journalists thinking, who's this and why should I trust them? And if you can continue to back that up, then it definitely pays off. What we actually see not only not drive media awareness, but impact negative press is just having an anonymous spokesperson. That doesn't really do as well, and you generally get less of an article feature than if you're able to actually name someone.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've heard that in other contexts as well. So just across all sectors, just the importance of using researchers, using expertise that may exist within any business, and that's what journalists are looking to you guys as PR and comms professionals to identify and guide on who those might be. So the people who are crunching the data, doing the research, and in fact sometimes that goes a lot further than always the same public face is to bring out the expert, because they're the people who can back it up with a lot of data as well. Just one final question. Neil Allday has said, I'm launching a brand new company with a unique message. What is the best way to engage with journalists who will not have heard of us? From my perspective, and can hear Hollie's view in just a second as well, just working with a lot of brands and supporting their ability to build relationships and identify the right audiences to engage. A lot of it comes down to trying to understand who is active on those topics right now. So not just thinking about this journalist is tagged to this beat, but actually who's writing about those topics that are relevant to your new company, and how do you conduct research on those individuals to see what's their current sentiment, view, what are they saying on social about those topics, and actually going in with quite a personalized approach to build up that relationship and strike up that rapport. So my advice on that is generally less is more, really focusing on the relevant people, which you can research through tools like our database, our contacts database, and others that exist as well. I don't know, Hollie, if you have a view to add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit it there, Lou. It's kind of about, first and foremost, just learning your audience, not just who they are, but where are they consuming their information and which brands are doing well in that media coverage. Like, how are they getting the messages across? Does your unique message align with anyone else's? But if it is entirely unique, where is your target audience engaging in information, and how can you capture that media outlets' interest as well? And there's and engaging in other media that your audience is, identify with their persona and understand their behaviors is the most impactful way to start, I suppose, is to know where they're consuming their information. Because if you're fully understanding of their perspectives and their and what they consume, then you're going to grab the media outlets' interest as well.
And we're also speaking to a lot of clients and prospective clients about other media, like not just journalists, but thinking about how you can engage bloggers, podcasters, even gaining publicity within relevant Facebook groups. So depending on the brands, the topics, the audience, there are other means of engaging where actually you can reach different audiences that might not be reading those traditional publications. And that's something that we can help with through our products as well. We spent a lot of time researching different groups to engage and making those available to many of our clients. So that's something that we can happily follow up on with anybody. There are a couple of questions that we haven't quite had time to answer, but we can follow up on those directly. There was a question, Hollie, about what does your dog think of the insights? So maybe that bark was a sign of enjoyment. But thank you very much for everybody's time. We will be following up, as Hollie said, and we're very happy to take any questions individually as well. So have a great rest of the day, everybody, and thank you again for joining.
Thanks, everyone.